certainly have fears that there is a serial killer at loose in Perth.
Sarah Spears, Jane Rimmer, Ciara Glennon.
And every time you saw a young girl walking by, you think, oh God, is she going to be the next victim?
Now, one man stands accused.
If police are right and Edwards is the Claremont serial killer, he's been hiding in plain sight for 20 years.
Today, court heard how dozens of fibres found on Ciara Glennon matched Telstra work pants like those worn by Bradley Edwards in the 90s. Welcome to week 19 of Claremont in Conversation. Natalie Bonjolo, Tim Clarke and forensic scientist Brendan Chapman, we're all with you today. Tim, day 5 on the stand for Rhys Powell, and he continued to outline comparisons of this specific group of fibres.
That's right, Matt. Some of our listeners might remember a film called Groundhog Day, where the main character, played by Bill Murray, woke up every day, the same day, and tried to make it different, but then failed. And today was my Groundhog Day, I think, because it was very, very similar to last Friday and last Thursday and last Wednesday, in that we went through, again, fibres found on Jane and Ciara, mostly or exclusively from Ciara today, and how they were compared to other fibres from the case. And today was blue polyester and blue rayon, and a little bit of grey right at the end, all found in Ciara's hair mass, all found in 2018, and then all subsequently compared to other fibres on the database relating to other macro cases and macro exhibits and macro victims, as it were. And so we went at a pretty decent pace today. I think we got through 25 fibres out of the 98 today, so we're more than halfway there in terms of going through them one by one. And if it wasn't my Groundhog Day, it was certainly Mr. Rhys Powell's Groundhog Day, because, as you said, he was on the stand again, giving very similar evidence to what he's given before. And I think he will be dreaming of the phrase, I consider that they corresponded in properties, because he said it a lot, because they did and correspond in properties a lot, these fibres, and obviously that's very important to the prosecution case.
Now, what about the fibres? Obviously a lot did correspond. What about the fibres that didn't correspond exactly?
Yeah, there were some of those today, Matt, and predominantly they were when these blue polyester fibres from Ciara's hair were compared to the blue polyester fibres found in Mr. Edwards' old car. Listeners from last week will remember they seized the car in 2016, did some very intensive work on that, found 13 blue fibres in that car under a bracket and on the carpet, which was vacuumed. When those were compared, quite a few of them differed in diameter, mostly. And so that led to Mr. Powell said they'd having to conclude that they didn't correspond exactly, but they were similar, as in they were similar composition, similar colour, and similar luster, but the width was slightly different. Now we're talking fibres that are microns in diameter, which is a millionth of a metre. So they're tiny, and so you really had to strain your eyes at the screen to see where the differences were, but they were there, particularly under these super powerful microscopes. And so Mr. Powell did have to say that they didn't correspond exactly, but they were similar. And Justice Hall picked up on that and said, asked whether the majority of the fibres in the car were thicker than those that from Ciara that were tested, and Mr. Powell did concede that was the case, but he also did point out that when the fibres from the car were compared to fibres from the Telstra pants, that they did correspond in all aspects, mostly when they were compared to that subset. So there was a little bit of difference there.
Okay, so if the fibres vary in thickness, how can they still correspond? Was there an explanation for that?
Well, so it's this sliding scale that I talked about last week. They either differ, they're either similar, or they either correspond. Correspond was the top level. That was when all the elements that they look for did match. When one of those is out, then Mr. Powell says he can't say they correspond, but they are similar. So that is when 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 5 of that checklist match up. Then he says they're similar. If they all match up, then they say they correspond. But that was a big enough issue for Justice Hall to pick it up and ask his own questions on it, and it might even become a bigger issue later in the week when we eventually do get to Mr. Powell's cross-examination from Mr. Jovich.
So, Brendan, does that muddy the waters a little bit with fibre evidence that, yes, they correspond, although they're not identical?
I'll probably speculate a little bit here, Dat, if I can, without knowing or having seen any of the evidence or knowing the detail of what was presented today as Tim does. But what I'm envisaging there is when you have I think I might have mentioned it before, that a fibre, as we call it, as a fibre, can actually be made up of smaller fibres, I suppose. If you kind of imagine that that ball of yarn sort of image, you can refer to the full thickness of that as a fibre, but it's actually made up of much thinner fibres within it. So what I'm guessing when you're hearing that they are consistent or similar in the colour and the makeup, but not the thickness, is that might be concluding that it could be part of a larger, wider fibre. But, I mean, I'm really speculating there and kind of having an educated guess. But I probably wouldn't use the word muddy it, because as Tim's kind of been explaining, there's this scale of how much something matches, and obviously if it doesn't have the same width or thickness, then it's just kind of a bit further down, I suppose, on that scale of, to use the word again, a stronger match or a weaker match.
Right. Tim, in terms of the different thickness, was Mr. Powell asked if that means then that you can't exclude that possibility that perhaps the fibres actually came from a different source and not the car or the pants?
No, he hasn't been asked that specifically. And what he has tried to explain is, obviously, no two fibres are going to be absolutely identical. I mean, and there is some sort of natural variance, more in natural fibres, if you get my drift. These are synthetic fibres, the polyesters, and so there are going to be slight variances. And to test that, they all often double test the fibre, go to a different part of the same fibre and do another microscopic comparison. But what he had to concede in court today was that for most of the ones that were compared, there was a slight difference in thickness. Now, as I say, that's more going to be for the defence to really drill down into that if they wish to. But again, what he was keen to stress was that when they were compared to when these car fibres, the fibres that were found under the bracket, were compared to the Telstra pants, which is the exemplar of where the prosecution said they come from, they did match. And we also know that a lot of the blue fibres that were found in Jane and Ciara's hair have also been compared to those exemplar Telstra pants and the swatch that was sent over, and they have also compared favourably or comparatively closely as well. So there's no doubt that in my mind that it will be something that the defence ask, and if Mr. Jovich is intelligent as you, Nat, then he might well ask that question as to, well, if they don't compare, then where else could they have come from?
It was interesting today that one of the fibres that Mr. Powell was talking about wasn't on the original spreadsheet, and it made me think back to the DNA evidence where there were many clerical errors and various errors and mishaps with Path West. And I thought with this fibre evidence, we haven't heard so many of those sorts of clerical mistakes. Brendan, is it easier with the fibre evidence for less room for those kinds of errors?
I'd say that's probably more a factor of that this work has been done within the last couple of years, whereby we've got much more developed methods and larger organisations or a larger number of people doing the work, and probably better defined protocols and procedures, as well as the fact that the fibre work really has only started in the recent years, whereas the DNA work originated, back in the 90s, and so the paper trail has been much longer temporally, I suppose, or through time for the DNA stuff. And as you can imagine, with your tax records, trying to keep that sort of information over a number of decades and follow up on it and ensure that it's all in order is it's quite an undertaking compared to just the last couple of years.
Right. Tim, was this clerical error or this fact that it wasn't on the spreadsheet, was that explained? Was it just a simple thing?
I think it was, yeah. I mean, given the amount of information that are on these spreadsheets, I'm amazed that we haven't come across more errors. To be fair, and it would appear that Mr. Powell has undertaken all this work himself. The first spreadsheet, the one with every single fibre and all the other comparisons and the hyperlinks to the pictures, is enormous. And even the comparison spreadsheet where he just details which fibres will compare to which, it's all colour coded. It would be an accountant's dream, this portion of the trial, if you're into lists and cells and Excel spreadsheets. You'd be salivating. But you'd have to say, given all the work, given all the different fibres, given all the machinations and possible comparisons that could have been done, it's pretty amazing that there hasn't been a misstep until now.
That's right. It's incredible that this is the first we've heard of. So he moved his way through the 25 polyester fibres, and then there seemed to be a bit of excitement when Mr. Powell went on to the next category of fibres.
Well, Justice Hall said he was excited, but that's a relative term in this portion of the trial, because there was 25 of these blue fibres, all found within a very short space of time, mostly by a senior analyst at Chem Centre, Peter Collins, who was doing this work. But to be fair, they're almost identical fibres, found in an identical way, analysed in an identical way, and very similar comparisons made. So when we did move on to a slightly different section, these are rayon fibres. Justice Hall did have a quip that he was quite excited to move on to something, and we heard something different. We heard these fibres are a slightly different look on the microscope. They're slightly different composition, but there were only 6 of them, which was exciting in itself. we went through them and they were compared, and so these rayon fibres are said to be from the same from the pants, not the shorts, from the pants, but just a slightly different fibre makeup, or one of the fibres that made up these pants. But once again, the ultimate goal of the prosecution is to point to the fact that is where they came from, and that is the only place they could come from. And so that was mid-afternoon, and then we got through those 6. And as I mentioned earlier, there were a couple of these grey polyester fibres, very similar to the ones found in Jane's hair, said to come from the seat back or seat insert of the car. And so we finished the day just going through the couple of those that were found on Ciara as well.
And with these different fibres, were you shown those in court today? Were there images of those, and how different did they look, for instance, the rayon fibre to the polyester ones?
Well, a couple of weeks ago now, I would have said there was no difference at all, but I've become, very, very down the fibre rabbit hole. So they did look slightly different, and particularly under. So there's two types of picture that we've been shown in court. Something called a bright field image, which is on a white background basically, and you can see the dark fibre. And then there's a polarized image, which is a little bit like the negative, but that one shows under UV light, and that shows up colors within the fibre, which is indicative of what the fibre is made of. When you look at the polyester fibres under that polarized microscope, there's a rainbow pattern to it. It's a little bit like oil on water, that sort of myriad of colours all spread along. When you put the rayon fibre, Mr. Powell pointed out, when you put that under the polarized imaging system, it's a more uniform colour, which is the absolute indicia of apparently. Now I know being a rayon fibre rather than a polyester fibre, but once again, all from the same pair of pants,
Yes.
And all found pretty much in the same place, i.e. Ciara's hair mass.
And if we want to have a look at those fibres for ourselves, can we get access to those on the website?
Yeah, we got a few more images today. The one image that people might really be interested, we got issued today, was the comparison, side-by-side comparison of a blue fibre found in Ciara's hair to a blue fibre found on Ciara's shirt compared to a blue fibre found on Jane's hair. And as far as I can tell, that is the very first image that's ever been publicly released that physically shows a connection between Jane and Ciara. Now, it's a tiny little thing, but it is quite a significant moment in that this is what the prosecution are really pointing to as a physical thing, not a they were killed in the same way, they were dumped in the same way, they left from the same area. That was found on Jane, that was found on Ciara, and look at the comparison. And when listeners might go to the website later tonight or tomorrow and have a look at that picture, they can see for themselves how similar, almost identical, those two fibres looked under the microscope when they were compared. And that must have been a big moment for the investigators to be able to physically point and then physically show the judge the similarities between those two fibres, and then taking that to the final level, the similarity between the two victims.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this was, we heard a little bit about this, didn't we, last week, and it really was the very first time that we'd heard about a physical link between the two victims.
Yeah, and as I say, we were given access to that photograph to be able to publish it today, and so that's what we will be doing in the newspaper and on the website in the next few hours, which once again in a very, very long history of this case, is another small but still significant milestone.
Excellent. All right. Well, we have a couple of questions from listeners, and this one may be for you, Brendan. This is from David. If there is any doubt regarding contamination of DNA, why not simply take a new scraping sample from Ciara's nails and do the tests again?
Yeah, I think we've had that question from a few people, and just in case I didn't answer it properly or answer it clearly before, basically when we do take samples for any forensic analysis from a crime scene, in most cases where, especially with regards to DNA, we are trying to collect as much of the material as possible, and namely all of it. So if we take a fingernail scraping, our goal is to remove all of the material from under the fingernail, not to leave any behind, because otherwise we might not get a result at all. So if we've done our job right, then there shouldn't be anything left under a fingernail after we've done it. And that's not including the options that we have to actually consume a whole fingernail or clip fingernails and things like that, which also go towards taking it all away. So the unfortunate thing about what we do is we can't go back and do it again with a lot of cases, with a lot of samples.
And this is why the pristine samples were considered so important in this trial. Tim, for you from Caroline, I was wondering whether the prosecution has provided any details of how many 1996 VS Holden Commodores Telstra had in their company fleet between 96 and 98. And of those cars in their fleet, how many were issued to technicians who would have worn the Telstra blue trousers?
No, it is a very good question, and it's there were way back before Christmas when the Telstra witnesses, the Telstra corporate witnesses were called. There was evidence submitted to the court about the Telstra fleet and how many of those cars were within the fleet. And from memory, I think there was the ownership details of those cars or driver details of those cars were also able to be searched in the Telstra archives. But the prosecution's job was a reversal, if you like. Rather than looking at the wide and then coming down to the narrow, they started with the narrow. And so they started with Mr. Edwards in that time period, particularly 1996 and 1997 when Jane and Ciara went missing. And so they started at that point, and they basically got their hit straight away in that he was issued that car. He drove that car, and that is also a formal admission that Mr. Edwards' lawyers have made on his behalf, that he doesn't dispute that was his car at the time. And now, as we've discussed ad infinitum, they've now got that actual car as well. So I understand where the question's coming from, but certainly with Mr. Edwards' admissions for that, the prosecution really don't need to go, and the defence can't, now they've admitted it, go into, well, could it have been another person wearing those pants with a car like that, because that is not disputed by Mr. Edwards, and on his side he says, yes, that was my car, and he's also obviously admitted that he worked for Telstra, and we've seen evidence that he ordered those pants as well. So I can understand where the question's coming from, and the prosecution will ask themselves that question as well, which is why they were so keen to pinpoint the ownership of the car, and they've done it so well that Mr. Edwards' lawyers have said, yeah, that's not something that the judge is going to have to decide.
Yeah, simply not necessary. So we know that there were 61 critical fibres in relation to Ciara Glennon. How many has Mr. Powell got through now of those?
What are we up to? I think we've done 50 in total. I think we've done 59 fibres altogether. So we've done all the blue polyester, we've done all the blue rayon, and we've done all the grey. So now we're going to go on to the light and grey polypropylene, which is the fibres the prosecution says come from the carpet, the cabin carpet. We've got a few of those to do. Then we've got some more blue polyester, which was found in a different place, i.e. it was found in the bucket that Ciara's hair was stored in for all those years. So they kept the bucket, they tested that, and they are said to have found some blue fibres in there as well. And then the last set will be more blue polyester fibres, which were said to have been found on Ciara's shirt, which they were actually found, or the process to find them was carried out by the FBI way back in 1999. So that'll be interesting to see whether we get any more little details about the exact process that the FBI went through to scrape that shirt. And then we've already gone through the continuity of when it went, when it came back, who handled it in between. And so that'll be that. Then that will be Ciara's fibres done, and then the last lot of fibres will be the fibres found in Mr. Edwards' car. So doing a little guesstimate on the pace we went through today, we did 25 fibres today. If we do that pace tomorrow, we'll be up to about 84, and then there'll be 14. So fingers crossed, touching all the wood that I can reach, we might have got through all the individual fibres by Wednesday lunchtime. And then Mr. Powell has got a little bit more just wrap-up evidence to do, and then we'll get to his cross-examination at sometime later in the week. So yeah, we're getting through there. We're getting through.
Nearly there. Nearly there. So basically tomorrow, Mr. Powell will be back on the stand tomorrow. We've probably got, like you said, another day and a half, and then moving forward from there, which everyone is waiting for, probably including Justice Hall by the sounds of things.
I think he, as interested as he is in fibres, I think everyone's it's dragging on a little bit, and we've got plenty more fibre evidence to come, because after that, as I've mentioned, is Dr. Ray Palmer, who is the state's expert. Now, he will be an interesting witness. I did a little bit of reading over the weekend about Dr. Palmer, and particularly one case that he was very involved in the UK, which the listeners might want to Google if they're up for it. It was the case of a guy called Stephen Wright. This is in the UK, where Dr. Palmer is based. He was given the nickname by the UK tabloids as the Suffolk Strangler. He was a gentleman, I use that term very loosely, who murdered 5 women in the Ipswich, Suffolk area of the UK, and killed them all in a very short space of time. And Dr. Palmer was very involved in the fibre part of that trial, and some fibres, amazingly, that corresponded to Mr. Wright's car, to Mr. Wright's pants, were found in the hair and on the bodies of all 5 of these women, which was a very significant part of securing that conviction in the UK. There's been significant coverage of that case, including several documentaries, one which includes Mr. Palmer actually talking about that process. And so when I was reading that over the weekend, a little click went off in my head as to why maybe the prosecutors in this case were so keen to get them on their side, because that case in particular bears striking similarities to this one in terms of the tenet of the evidence that was presented in court in the UK. So he will be a very interesting witness, but how that evidence is delivered, we're yet to see. But it's going to have to be on video link. So once again, that might mean a couple of late nights for myself and my media colleagues. But as our listeners know, I'm here for everything and here for the long run. So we won't be missing a minute.
Did you happen to read if the trial of Stephen Wright was before a jury or a judge alone?
No, that was a jury, Nat. That was a jury trial. And amazingly, given that the number of victims in that case, it only took about 5 or 6 weeks to hear that case in the UK. But it only took about 6 hours for the jury to find him guilty of all 5 of those murders. So
I guess the difference was it maybe wasn't a historical case like this one is.
No, it certainly wasn't. It was a much more much more contemporary case. But as I say, the similarities between the fibre evidence in that case and this one did strike me as having very close ties in terms of fibres found in hair and then matched to cars and pants in particular. It'll be very interesting to hear what Dr. Palmer says in terms of his role in this trial. Will be just to wrap all the prosecution's evidence up in a nice, neat bow and present it to the judge as I'm an expert and this is what I say.
Yeah. It'll be very interesting. Well, Tim, thank you so much for doing time in court today. And Brendan, thank you so much for your time today. We'll be back tomorrow for day 76 of Claremont in Conversation, and we'll chat to you then.
This podcast is hosted by Natalie Bonjolo, produced by Kate Ryan, and recorded in the studios of 7 West Media.
Sign up for daily emails and all the latest on the Claremont trial at thewest.com.au. And if local news delivered differently appeals to you, tune into WA's newest morning show, The West Live with Jenna Clarke. It's talkback radio, but without the interruptions. Listen live weekdays from 8:45 a.m. on thewest.com.au or catch up with the podcast.